It was a Tuesday evening, one of those nights when nothing feels extraordinary. The house was quiet. The television was off. I was waiting for a small online order I barely remembered purchasing. When the doorbell rang, I assumed it was the delivery driver. I walked toward the door casually, without suspicion, without preparation for the moment that would fracture the life I believed I understood. I opened it with a relaxed smile that dissolved instantly. Standing there was a woman who did not belong to the evening's calm. I recognized her from photographs my wife had shown me on her phone. She had been described as reliable, thoughtful, loyal, someone who never caused trouble, someone who would never stand at my door with a face like a storm. Her eyes were not calm. They were alive with something I did not recognize as anger or sorrow. It was urgency. She did not enter. She did not ask to sit. She simply looked at me as though she needed to confirm I existed. Her voice was steady when she spoke. The sentence she delivered did not shout. It carved through the air with surgical precision. She said my wife was cheating with her husband. My body did not react at first. My mind tried to reject the meaning before it reached my chest. The walls of my home did not shake, yet everything inside me shifted. I felt my breath stumble and then freeze. She raised her hand and placed a small flash drive on the threshold. The object seemed innocent, yet it felt heavier than any weapon. She told me to watch it and call her afterward. There was no accusation in her tone, no hysteria, no plea for sympathy. She spoke like someone delivering evidence to a judge. Then she turned and walked away, not waiting for questions, not offering explanations. The streetlight cast her shadow ahead of her, making her departure feel like the closing of chapter one had not realized I was in. The sound of her steps faded, leaving only silence and the faint hum of my own pulse. I remained at the entrance, holding the flash drive as though it might explode. A part of me wanted to open the door wide and chase her, demand reasons, ask how she discovered the truth. Another part wanted to slam the door shut and pretend the evening had never happened. Instead, I stood motionless. My thoughts scattered like broken glass. I replayed her words again and again, waiting for them to lose meaning. They did not. They landed deeper each time. I eventually closed the door and walked toward my office, unable to stop glancing at the thin plastic device resting in my palm. Proof is terrifying when you have not asked for it. I placed the flash drive on my desk and stared at it as though it could sense fear. My imagination began assembling images I had never wanted to see. I thought about nights when my wife stayed late at work, mornings when her phone vibrated before sunrise, and weekends that suddenly became dedicated to errands I was not invited to join. Memory rearranged itself into patterns that now seemed obvious. I sat in front of my computer, but hesitated before inserting the flash drive. I imagined two futures. One where the truth remained hidden, and I continued living a life constructed on trust that had already expired. The other where I pressed play and allowed my world to be rewritten. Neither choice felt safe. I placed my hand on the mouse, feeling its cold surface beneath my fingers. My heart did not race. It throbbed, slow and heavy. In that instant, I understood something brutal. The most painful revelations are not the ones we discover. They're the ones delivered to us by people who expected we already knew. The house that once represented comfort was now courtroom. The silence that once felt peaceful became unbearable. I stared at the screen, suspended between before and after, knowing that the moment I pressed play, my life would divide into two chapters, and only one of them would contain the truth. Midnight arrived like a verdict. The house was dark, and every sound seemed exaggerated. Even the ticking of the wall clock felt intrusive, as if time itself wanted to witness what I was about to uncover. I sat at my desk, the flash drive resting in front of me, small enough to ignore and powerful enough to dismantle everything I believed I understood about my life. I took a breath that felt heavier than the room around me. My hand hovered above the keyboard. The hesitation was not fear of the truth. It was fear of losing the lie I'd been living comfortably inside. When I finally inserted the drive, the computer reacted instantly, opening a folder with a single video file. No explanation, no label, just an invitation to an ending I had not agreed to. My finger pressed play. The screen flickered for a second, and then she appeared. My wife. Not the version who walked through our home with practiced affection, but a version I had never seen. She was smiling in a way that looked effortless. It was a smile filled with warmth, excitement, and belonging. It was a smile she had never offered me. Beside her sat the man I once admired. A man I believed represented leadership and integrity. They were seated close enough for their bodies to communicate what their words did not. Their hands brushed casually, yet with intention. They laughed together, not the structured laughter I knew from formal gatherings, but something intimate. Their voices overlapped comfortably, as if they had rehearsed the rhythm of each other's sentences. My stomach tightened. This was not a mistake. This was a world they had built without me. The video continued. Their conversations were not passionate confessions of forbidden love. They were plans. Plans about places they wanted to visit, secrets they kept from their spouses, and dreams they refused to share with anyone else. Each sentence was a thread, and I watched them weave a tapestry that excluded me. The betrayal did not roar. It whispered. It whispered through inside jokes I did not understand, private glances that communicated history, and pauses filled with meaning that had no place in my life. I leaned back in my chair, expecting anger to arrive like a storm. It did not. Instead, something quieter settled inside me. Clarity. The realization that betrayal does not begin the day you discover it. It starts the moment someone decides they deserve a life you are not part of. The roots of betrayal had been growing unnoticed. I thought back to moments that now seemed suspicious. Sudden changes in schedule, new explanations for old habits, conversations that felt incomplete. I had dismissed every sign as stress, ambition, or exhaustion. The video simply confirmed what my instincts had tried to warn me about. The footage shifted to another location, a restaurant I recognized but had never visited with her. She held a wine glass and leaned toward him with a familiarity that belonged to shared history. They spoke about their spouses with a tone that was not guilt, but amusement. They did not view their betrayal as risk. They viewed it as inevitability. That realization stung more than any physical pain could. It was not the act that hurt. It was the comfort with which it was committed. I paused the video and stared at the frozen frame. Her face was relaxed, free of the tension she sometimes carried at home. It hit me then. She had not changed suddenly. She had been leaving me piece by piece. The betrayal did not begin with infidelity. It began with emotional absence. I had been living beside someone who had already mentally moved on. I pressed play again. I needed to see everything. Each remaining second carved deeper into the truth. When the video ended, I did not cry. Tears would have implied loss. I did not scream. Anger would have implied surprise. Instead, I sat in silence, absorbing the realization that clarity can feel colder than grief. The truth had arrived without permission, but now it refused to leave. The life I thought I understood had expired long before I pressed play. I stared at her number for hours before pressing call. The sun was barely rising, yet my night had not ended. When she answered, her voice carried no panic, no hesitation, no attempt to soften the blow of what she had done. It was calm, unsettlingly calm, as if she had traveled through this pain long before I recognized it. She did not ask how I felt or whether I had watched the video. She already knew. Instead, she asked if I could meet her at a cafe far from where either of us lived. Not a request. A direction spoken by someone who had nothing left to lose except the truth. The cafe was quiet when I arrived. It sat near a road that led to nowhere familiar, a place people visited only when they wanted to disappear. She was already there, seated by the window with a cup of untouched coffee. She did not look up when I approached. She waited until I sat down, as though timing mattered more than manners. Her eyes were different from the night before. Less fire, more exhaustion. She looked like someone who had pulled herself back together repeatedly, each repair weaker than the last. She spoke first. She said she did not regret coming to my door. She refused, in her words, to be the last person in a story she unwillingly joined. There was no bitterness, only resolve. She explained how her husband had changed months earlier. The secrecy, the late meetings, the sudden interest in expensive clothes he never used to wear. She thought it was ambition. She later learned ambition was a disguise. She found messages, hotel bookings, and conversations that turned her stomach. She said it quietly, not seeking sympathy. She simply narrated facts she once hoped were misunderstandings. I asked why she chose to tell me. Her answer was immediate. She said betrayal becomes heavier when carried alone. She refused to let her husband rewrite history and portray her as blind. She refused to be a silent witness to someone else's fiction. She wanted someone else to see him clearly, someone who understood deception not from rumors but from evidence. Her strength did not roar. It rested in the certainty of her decisions. She did not collapse. She adapted. She leaned back and studied me, not with suspicion, but with recognition. She told me she knew the moment I opened the door that I had no idea. She saw confusion, not denial. She saw a man who believed loyalty protected him from lies. She warned me that loyalty is not armor. It is an invitation for the wrong person to take advantage. It was then I realized she was not cold. She was tired of pretending heartbreak looked dramatic. It rarely does. It unfolds quietly, in details, in half smiles, in repeated excuses. We sat in silence for a moment. It was not uncomfortable. It was reflective. She shared how she confronted her husband once, hoping to hear truth. Instead, he dismissed her questions, blamed her imagination, and turned her fears into flaws. She learned then that some people do not deny betrayal because they care. They deny it because they enjoy the power of withholding truth. She withstood that reality longer than she admitted. Her calm was not natural. It was constructed, built from nights where sleep refused to arrive and mornings where she pretended nothing had changed. She asked if I'd noticed signs in my own home. I wanted to say no, but the memories returned uninvited. My wife's distant tone, her sudden bursts of enthusiasm for things that excluded me, her explanations crafted with more confidence than affection. I realized the betrayal had not started when the affair began. It started when her heart drifted away, and I convinced myself it was temporary. The woman across from me nodded, as though she heard the confession I never voiced. She did not offer advice. She offered presence. She reminded me that pain is not a contest, and dignity does not require noise. She stood up, placed a card with her number on the table, and told me not to disappear into silence. Then she left, walking with the grace of someone who finally understood her worth. I watched her leave, realizing she was never supposed to be part of my story. Yet, without her, I would have remained in a life built on illusions. She did not save me. She simply refused to drown alone. That was strength I never expected to witness. The cafe where we sat suddenly felt less like a neutral location and more like an interrogation room without walls. She placed her phone on the table and unlocked it with a composure that suggested she had rehearsed this moment. Her fingers moved with certainty, as if guided by a map of wounds she had memorized. She opened a folder, not filled with assumptions or suspicions, but organized proof. Dates, receipts, screenshots, reservations. She had not come with stories. She had come with evidence. She slid the first document toward me. A dinner receipt from a restaurant neither of us had ever visited. The date matched a night when my wife claimed she was mentoring new team members. I remember that evening clearly. I had prepared a meal at home, waiting for her, believing her schedule was overloaded. The receipt showed 2 meals, a dessert shared, and a bottle of wine priced high enough to suggest celebration. My stomach tightened. Betrayal did not scream. It whispered through numbers that now confronted me. She continued, revealing more. Hotel bookings registered under corporate travel codes. The locations were close enough to home to avoid suspicion, yet far enough to justify absence. Each reservation corresponded to nights my wife came home exhausted, claiming work politics drained her. It was not work that drained her. It was effort spent sculpting a life beyond mine. I stared at the names, the times, the line items that exposed a world hidden in plain sight. She pointed to calendar entries she had traced back from her husband's email account. Meetings that never existed, seminars canceled at the last minute, errands constructed like alibis. She spoke calmly, not recounting theory but truth carved into data. She showed messages exchanged between them. Not expressions of passion, but strategies. They coordinated opportunities to escape their spouses without raising suspicion. It felt less like infidelity and more like a joint venture. A blueprint drafted with precision. The most disturbing part was not what they did, but how much effort they invested into maintaining appearances. They did not stumble into the affair. They engineered it. They studied our habits, predicted our reactions, and built excuses sturdy enough to hide behind. I recalled evenings when my wife insisted she was staying late to finalize reports. I believed her dedication was admirable. Now, I saw dedication of a different kind. Dedication to deceit. The woman across the table showed more documents. Gift receipts, hotel, loyalty points, photographs of credit card statements with dates that traced a timeline parallel to my marriage. The evidence did not shout betrayal. It cataloged it. Piece by piece, I watched a second life unfold before my eyes. A life so carefully constructed that I felt foolish for not noticing its architecture earlier. I asked her how long she had known. She answered with a sigh that sounded old. She discovered the first sign months ago, a transaction that made no sense. Instead of confronting emotion, she confronted numbers. Numbers do not lie. She had followed the trail until it led to me. She did not arrive at my door out of impulse. She arrived because she saw patterns I never imagined existed. The cafe around us remained unaware of the dissection of two marriages occurring quietly at a corner table. People laughed, ordered pastries, and scrolled through their phones, oblivious to the collapse of illusions happening inches away. Betrayal hides best where no one looks for truth. In receipts, in travel itineraries, in casual phrases that feel harmless until they become evidence. I felt anger creeping in, not because of what I saw, but because of what I missed. I had defended excuses, justified absences, and celebrated achievements built on lies. The affair was not spontaneous. It was a project, structured, resourced, executed. And we were not partners. We were obstacles. The woman closed her phone and leaned back, her expression no longer tense. We sat in silence, absorbing a truth neither of us deserved. Betrayal is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is administrative, signed, dated, and paid for. I realized then that we were not victims of passion. We were casualties of planning. That evening, the walls of my home felt different. They were the same walls, painted in the same colors, yet everything looked foreign. I drove back without music, without thoughts that could comfort me, only a focused awareness of what needed to happen. My hands did not tremble. My voice was not rehearsed. I walked into the house with the calm of someone who no longer needed answers. I already had them. My wife was in the living room, casually scrolling through her phone, unaware that reality had changed its shape. I stood in front of her and introduced the facts without decoration. I spoke of dates, receipts, bookings, and patterns that no longer allowed interpretation. She did not deny anything. She did not gasp or cry. She looked at me the same way someone examines a restaurant bill before deciding whether the price is worth a meal. Her reaction was a knife sharper than any evidence. Her first question was not why I thought this or how I found out. It was how much I knew. That question revealed everything. She was not sorry. She was calculating. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the ghosts of every moment I dismissed my intuition. The times I waited for her at dinner, convincing myself I was thoughtful. The time she arrived late, claiming exhaustion. I thought love meant patience. She used my patience as permission. I saw her now without filters. The woman who once smiled at me across the breakfast table was not gone. She had never existed in the way I imagined. I loved a version of her that only lived inside my hope. She began explaining, not to apologize, but to justify. She spoke of feeling trapped, misunderstood, unappreciated. Words she selected carefully, as if she had practiced them. I listened and realized she was not describing our marriage. She was describing her desire for freedom without responsibility. Her betrayal did not come from loneliness. It came from entitlement. She believed happiness was something owed to her, regardless of the casualties it created. I asked if she loved him. She did not answer. She did not need to. Her lack of remorse stunned me. Not because I expected tears, but because she behaved as though betrayal was a transaction, a choice she made with confidence and assumed I would eventually tolerate. She spoke about her future, not ours. She used phrases that turned my existence into an obstacle rather than a partner. Her tone carried no hesitation, no regret, no shame. She was not broken. She was relieved. I finally knew. Something inside me changed. The pain did not come from the affair. It came from understanding I had placed loyalty in someone who treated commitment like a seasonal costume. I saw myself from above, like a character in a story who refused to accept he was no longer part of the plot. She was not my companion. She was a person passing through, collecting experiences, leaving behind whatever did not amuse her anymore. I looked at her one last time, not searching for emotions, but observing the truth. She feared consequences, not loss. She feared exposure, not guilt. Her marriage vows were not promises. They were options she reviewed whenever convenience demanded it. That evening, I let go of the version of myself that needed explanations. I realized betrayal does not require fire. It requires neglect. Flames are visible. Neglect builds quietly until nothing recognizable remains. I walked away from her mid-sentence, not because I was angry, but because I understood words would not change a reality that had already chosen its direction. I left the room, not as a husband, but as a man who finally accepted the difference between devotion and denial. My naivety died that night, not with screaming, not with accusations, but with clarity. I did not lose my wife. I lost the illusion that she was ever mine. 2 days passed in a haze of questions that refused to settle. I moved through the hours like someone visiting a house he no longer recognized. Nothing had changed physically, yet nothing felt familiar. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was a reminder of what had collapsed. On the second afternoon, my phone buzzed. Her name appeared on the screen. She had written 3 words that carried more weight than any of the evidence she had shown me. We should talk. I hesitated before replying. I wondered whether she had uncovered something new, another layer of deception, another detail that would tighten the knot in my chest. Part of me did not want more truth. The truth had already taken enough. Yet I agreed. We met at the same cafe, the neutral ground where our lives had begun to change without either of us asking for it. She arrived early, seated with the same composed posture she carried days before, as though her world had taught her that collapse is not a reason to lose balance. She did not begin with sympathy. She did not offer apologies. She did not even mention the affair. Instead, she asked a question that landed like a stone in water. What are you planning to do with your life now? The simplicity of it unsettled me. I expected anger, analysis, or shared outrage. Instead, she handed me a mirror. She was not interested in rehashing betrayal. She was focused on what existed beyond it. Her tone was calm, not detached. She spoke as if she had stood where I was standing and knew the exact decisions that mattered. She explained that betrayal creates a strange freedom. It strips away illusions, but leaves space. She had spent months drowning in humiliation before realizing that survival begins when you start imagining something else. She looked at me as though she recognized a man who had not yet realized the ground beneath him was no longer breaking. It was settling. I listened, unsure how to respond. My emotions were still tangled, yet her words created a direction I had not considered. Until that moment, I had viewed myself through the lens of what had been taken from me. I had lost trust, companionship, and the future I thought was secure. She challenged that view. She asked if I intended to live inside a tragedy someone else wrote, or if I was prepared to create something of my own. She pulled her coffee closer and shared pieces of her journey. She described nights when she questioned her worth, days when she doubted her sanity, and the moment she realized betrayal was not her failure. It was someone else's weakness. She looked at me and said pain is not a destination. It is a passage. Her voice did not tremble. It carried the steadiness of someone who refused to be defined by what happened. She told me the most dangerous part of betrayal is not the act itself, but the identity it tries to give you if you let it. I asked her why she cared about what I did next. She smiled, not out of affection, but understanding. She said we were both standing at a crossroads created by someone else's lies. Most people spend the rest of their lives staring at the rubble. Few realize rubble is the beginning of construction. She was not offering comfort. She was offering perspective. She did not want to know how broken I felt. She wanted to know what I planned to build. Her confidence unsettled me. She believed healing was not about forgetting. It was about redirecting energy. She told me I had a choice. I could spend the next decade proving my worth to people who misused it, or I could build a life where loyalty was not a favor, but a value. She reminded me that no one rises by fighting ghosts. People rise by turning endings into pivots. The conversation ended without conclusions, yet something had shifted. When I walked out of the cafe, I realized the question she asked was not about revenge, justice, or closure. It was about direction. She saw something I had not yet accepted. I was not trapped. I was unanchored. Betrayal did not define my future. It simply cleared space for it. We chose a restaurant neither of us had visited before. Neutral ground. No history attached. No memories waiting to ambush us. The place was quiet, with lighting dim enough to soften the edges of the day, but not dark enough to distort reality. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table, studying the menu with a calm that suggested she had stopped expecting life to surprise her. I took a seat across from her, unsure of what this evening meant or where it would lead. There was no script, no hidden motive, no emotional debt, just presence. The waiter approached, took our orders, and left without lingering. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was not uncomfortable. It was unfamiliar. Silence, once associated with suspicion and distance, now felt like an invitation to rebuild without pretense. She was the first to speak. She asked how I had been since our last conversation. Not out of courtesy, but curiosity. Her tone did not carry pity. It carried respect. I told her about the strange sensation of waking up in a life that felt disconnected from the person I used to be. She nodded, understanding without interrupting. As the evening unfolded, I noticed something remarkable. She listened, not to correct, defend, or diagnose, but to understand. Her attention was steady, not performative. It had been a long time since I had spoken without anticipating judgment. I told her about the awkwardness of navigating my house, the echo of every unspoken question, and the realization that betrayal leaves a vacuum where certainty once lived. She did not offer cliches or promises. She simply acknowledged my words as pieces of truth that deserve space. When our meals arrived, the conversation shifted. She spoke about her own journey, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She described how trust can become a habit rather than a choice, and how easy it is to confuse endurance with loyalty. She admitted she had ignored her instincts because belief was easier than confrontation. Hearing her speak made me realize we were not sitting together because of shared pain. We were sitting together because we finally understood what it meant to stop pretending. Halfway through dinner, something unexpected happened. She laughed. It was not a loud laugh. It was a real one, the kind that escapes when the body forgets to guard itself. The sound startled me, not because of its volume, but because of what it unlocked inside me. I felt something stir, something that had been buried under disappointment and fatigue. It was not desire. It was recognition. Recognition that the part of me capable of feeling alive had not died. It had been waiting for honesty. The evening continued with stories that held no agenda. We talked about books we never finished, decisions we regretted, and dreams we had postponed until further notice. She confessed that she once believed marriage was a destination rather than a journey. I admitted I mistook patience for proof. Through these exchanges, we built something fragile yet sturdy. Not a bond, not a promise, but a foundation where truth could exist without apology. By the time dessert arrived, I realized we had not mentioned our spouses in over an hour. The betrayal that once dictated every thought had become a reference point rather than a prison. The present moment was not defined by who we had been with, but who we were becoming. She observed the room for a moment and said that beginnings often disguise themselves as endings. I understood what she meant. Sometimes the collapse of one world creates the doorway to another. We left the restaurant without lingering. No dramatic farewell, no promises to meet again, no rehearsed acknowledgement of connection. Yet the walk to my car felt different. There was weight behind me, but not the oppressive kind. It was the weight of awareness. I drove home with the realization that healing does not always arrive with therapy, closure, or revenge. Sometimes it begins with a single conversation over dinner, shared by two people who stopped being defined by what hurt them. That night did not fix my life. It did something far more important. It reminded me that it was not over. The days that followed our dinner did not feel dramatic. They did not come with speeches or sudden breakthroughs. They unfolded quietly, yet each one carried a shift I could not ignore. Conversations that once felt like detours became directions. What began as exchanges of thoughts turned into something far more practical. She did not treat healing like an emotion. She treated it like a project. Without saying it, she made me realize that surviving betrayal was never the milestone. Moving beyond it was. One afternoon, she asked to see my resume. I hesitated, embarrassed by how outdated it was. It reflected a version of myself that belonged to a man who believed stability came from loyalty alone. She studied it with the attention of someone inspecting a blueprint. She pointed out words that weakened my achievements and highlighted skills I had never considered valuable. She showed me how my experience carried more weight than I allowed myself to believe. Then she asked a question that unsettled me. Why had I convinced myself I did not deserve better opportunities? I did not have an answer. Her question revealed something I had never examined. Betrayal had not started the night I learned the truth. It started years earlier, the moment I began believing that comfort was the ceiling of ambition. She did not tell me to dream. She told me to update my resume. Practical steps, disguised as encouragement, began replacing the theories I once used to explain my limitations. Within a week, she introduced me to people she trusted. Not friends who would offer sympathy, but professionals who respected competence. Our meetings took place in quiet corners of cafes, co-working spaces, and offices where introductions led to discussions, and discussions led to possibilities I had never allowed myself to consider. I noticed how she spoke about me. She did not present me as a man recovering from betrayal. She presented me as someone whose potential had been misplaced. It was the first time I realized potential could be lost not through failure, but through complacency. The transformation did not arrive with fanfare. It moved subtly, like a seed taking root. She encouraged me to apply for positions I once rejected without reading descriptions. Opportunities one believed belonged to people with cleaner histories or fewer disappointments. She listened as I explained my fears, not to soothe them, but to expose them. She challenged my certainty that starting over was a burden. She referred to it as a reset. A new phase that required no apology. I found myself waking earlier, not because I had obligations, but because I finally had direction. I spent evenings revising my portfolio, researching companies, and preparing for interviews. Silence, once the carrier of my doubts, became a tool. Without the noise of justification or resentment, I could see myself clearly. The version of me that had tolerated neglect no longer had authority. A different version was forming, one who recognized value before surrendering it. She continued checking in, never guiding, always nudging. She sent articles about industries I mentioned casually. She asked about interviews before I had the chance to avoid the topic. She reminded me that preparation was not pressure, but respect for possibility. We never spoke of my marriage. We never analyzed the affair. Those subjects belonged to a chapter no longer worth narrating. The silence between us was not avoidance. It was progress. Slowly, what she offered was not support. It was reflection. Her confidence forced me to investigate my own. I began to see how much energy I had invested into maintaining a life that no longer existed. Instead of rebuilding a shattered identity, I was constructing an entirely new one. The betrayal that once defined me became irrelevant. It no longer owned my thoughts. It simply marked the moment I stopped sleepwalking. By the end of that month, something became undeniable. I was no longer trying to outrun pain. I was outgrowing it. My life was no longer an aftermath. It was becoming a direction. She did not repair me. She reminded me I was never broken. I was simply quiet enough to forget what I was capable of. Transformation does not require noise. It requires movement. And movement had begun. Change does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, and those who once believed they owned your attention begin to notice its absence long before they understand the reason. I had stopped reacting to my wife's presence. I was polite but distant, present but unreachable. Days passed without arguments, demands, or explanations. My silence was not a tactic. It was a consequence. I no longer lived in the world she once controlled. She sensed it, and like someone who suddenly realizes a door is closing, she rushed toward it. At first, she asked where I was going. A simple question, yet one she had never asked before. For years, my movements had been irrelevant to her. Now they mattered. She approached me with a voice coded in concern, but concern without history is suspicion. I answered briefly, offering no access to my intentions. Her smile tightened. She tried again the next day, asking if I wanted dinner together, even suggesting we revisit places we once enjoyed. She spoke with enthusiasm, but behind her words lived panic. Her tone carried a question she did not dare voice. Who are you becoming without me? I watch her perform affection the same way an actor performs a role they never rehearsed properly. She commented on my clothes, complimented choices she once ignored, and touched my arm as if touch could erase months of abandonment. She laughed louder, smiled longer, and looked at me with urgency disguised as interest. She was not rebuilding the marriage. She was trying to protect her position in a life she was no longer part of. The shift became more obvious when my phone rang late one evening. She wanted to know when I would be home. Not because she cared about my return, but because she noticed I no longer volunteered information. She asked if everything was all right between us. The question sounded heavy, as though she finally noticed the space between us had turned into distance she could not bridge. I told her everything was fine. It was. I simply no longer believed her presence determined my stability. Her attempts grew bolder. She woke early to prepare breakfast, something she had not done in years. She left notes on the counter praising qualities she once ignored. She sent messages during the day with phrases that pretended intimacy. It would have worked once. Not now. Betrayers do not fear consequences. They fear irrelevance. She was no longer the center of my decisions, and the realization unsettled her. One evening, she confronted me in the kitchen, her voice trembling with frustration she tried to hide. She said she felt I was pulling away. I reminded her she had left long before I ever did. She insisted people make mistakes. I agreed. Mistakes require remorse. Betrayal requires choice. Her silence afterward said more than her words. She understood I was not confused. She could no longer manipulate doubt. Her behavior shifted again. She volunteered information I had not requested. She described her day in detail, mentioned coworkers by name, and offered transparency she never practiced when she owed it. She asked about my schedule, wanted to join activities she once criticized. She tried to reclaim access through familiarity. But familiarity without trust is intrusion. The most revealing moment arrived when she suggested therapy. Not because she sought healing, but because she sensed she was losing control. She attempted to frame her actions as misunderstandings instead of decisions. I listened without interruption. She spoke for 20 minutes and paused, expecting an emotional response. I offered none. My emotions no longer lived in the house she once ruled. She finally asked the question she feared most. Was there someone else? I said no. There was only someone who reminded me of myself. The version I lost while trying to be enough for her. Her face shifted. That was the moment she understood the truth. I was not punishing her. I was replacing the identity she once assigned to me. The past does not return because it misses you. It returns because it notices it is no longer welcome. She tried to reclaim access to my life, but she was speaking to someone she no longer recognized. I was not angry. I was unavailable. And unavailability is something the past cannot negotiate with. There was no grand declaration linking us together. No pact. No whisper of future possibilities. What existed between us was subtler and far more powerful. It was understanding. We were not building a relationship. We were rebuilding ourselves in the presence of someone who refused to let the past dictate the next sentence of our lives. She never acted like an answer. She behaved like a reminder that answers already existed inside me. I had simply stopped looking for them. Our interactions became checkpoints rather than escapes. She asked questions I had never considered, not about my pain, but about my identity. She wanted to know what I believed in, not what had broken me. Most people listen to respond. She listened to reveal. With her, there was no rush to paint a picture of what could be. There was a quiet insistence on examining what already was. She did not comment on my former marriage. She commented on my silence. She noticed how often I hesitated before expressing an opinion, as though waiting for invisible permission. One afternoon, she challenged me to list things I genuinely enjoyed. It was an innocent question, yet I struggled. I realized I had tailored my preferences to convenience, not authenticity. She pointed out that adaptation is not resilience when it becomes self-erasure. That sentence lingered in my mind longer than any betrayal ever had. Her influence was not loud. It was precise. She did not rebuild me. She removed what never belonged. She encouraged me to revisit old interests I had abandoned. Music I once loved. Ideas I stopped exploring. Projects I postponed out of obligation. She taught me that routine can become a cage when it has no vision. I found myself reading again, not because I was escaping something, but because curiosity had returned. I began making decisions without fearing judgment. The world around me did not change, yet everything inside me did. She introduced me to people who valued growth, not gossip. Conversations with them were not competitions. They were exchanges of insight. They talked about purpose, choices, and opportunities. Nobody measured worth through possessions or roles. Nobody asked what I had lost. They asked what I intended to create. I realized I had lived for years inside a narrative I never authored. She handed me a pen without demanding I write anything for her. We spent time in spaces that encouraged reflection. Libraries, community events, workshops. Environments where people showed up not to impress, but to evolve. She never sat across from me waiting for admiration. She sat beside me examining possibilities. She taught me that support does not mean carrying someone. It means handing them the tools they forgot they owned. There was one moment that defined everything. We were walking after a seminar when she stopped and asked what I believed my life could become if betrayal was no longer part of the equation. The question unsettled me because I had never imagined myself without the weight of what happened. She explained that past wounds can become identities if we let them. That night, I realized I'd spent years living reactively. She was inviting me to live intentionally. She did not encourage revenge. She encouraged responsibility. She insisted that a future built on retaliation always collapses. A future built on vision sustains itself. With her, I was not replacing memories. I was replacing habits that kept me imprisoned in them. She showed me that healing is not the opposite of pain. It is the refusal to become its museum. One day, while discussing plans unrelated to either of our personal histories, she said something that stayed with me. She told me that a person capable of growing after betrayal is far more dangerous than someone who never experienced it. Not dangerous to others, but dangerous to mediocrity. That sentence became my turning point. She did not enter my life to fill a void. She arrived to remind me there was no void to fill. I was not incomplete. I was unawakened. She did not rewrite her way into my story. She showed me where I stopped writing mine, and that changed everything. The encounter happened on a Saturday afternoon at a community event neither of us planned to attend together. It was one of those gatherings where people exchanged business cards more than ideas, and smiles felt like currency. We stood near an exhibit discussing a project I had recently joined, the kind of opportunity one once believed was beyond my reach. She listened attentively, offering insights that sharpened my perspective. Our presence did not announce anything. It was steady, grounded, and free from the noise that once dictated our lives. I noticed her first. My ex-wife entered the venue with a confidence I had seen many times before, the confidence of someone convinced the world still revolved around her decisions. She scanned the room with the restless energy of a person seeking validation. Her gaze traveled over familiar faces until it landed on us. Her expression did not freeze. It collapsed. She expected me to look unsettled, guilty, or eager for acknowledgement. Instead, she saw someone who no longer needed her recognition. Her steps slowed as she processed the scene. There were no theatrics, no gestures that implied romance, no signs of possession, just two people standing side by side, having a conversation rooted in purpose rather than performance. The woman she once dismissed without a second thought was now a presence she could not ignore. Not because of status or appearance, but because of calm. There's a strange power in standing next to someone who sees you, not as a reflection of their needs, but as an individual capable of direction. My ex-wife stared at her with a confusion she tried to disguise as composure. She was not looking at a rival. She was looking at the evidence of her own miscalculation. Betrayal had offered her temporary excitement. Integrity had offered me permanence. She had gambled on secrecy and lost to transparency. She assumed I would remain in the ruins she created, never imagining someone else would help me build something beyond them. She approached us, not with confidence, but with entitlement disguised as politeness. She asked how I had been, as though she still held the right to receive an answer. I responded calmly, offering no explanation and no emotion. She waited for discomfort. It never arrived. She attempted to smile, but her eyes betrayed her. She was not curious about my happiness. She was threatened by my indifference. Her gaze shifted to the woman beside me, searching for weaknesses. She found none. The woman did not flinch or compete. She did not stake a claim or explain her presence. She stood with the ease of someone who did not need to justify her value. Growth does not require introduction. It reveals itself without effort. My ex-wife attempted a final pivot, asking if we came together. I answered truthfully. We did not come together. We arrived separately and crossed paths because our lives now moved in similar directions. That statement unsettled her more than any accusation could have. She wanted to believe she had been replaced. Replacement implies comparison. Comparison implies relevance. She was neither. The woman beside me remained silent, not out of discomfort, but out of choice. Silence can be more powerful than argument when truth stands behind it. My ex-wife looked away, unsettled by something she could not control. She still believed ownership and attachment were the same thing. She never understood that the real loss was not me. It was the version of herself that believed loyalty was optional. She left moments later, carrying the weight of a realization she had not planned to encounter. Nothing had been taken from her. She had surrendered everything through neglect. Pain introduced us. Truth connected us. Healing kept us aligned. The story did not end with revenge, drama, or victory laps. It ended with peace. Some people ruin your life without blinking. Others arrive to show you why rebuilding it was necessary. The past returned expecting regret. Instead, it found closure. The ending was not triumph. It was clarity. And clarity is something no one can take away.